My name is Timothy Robinson, and the last year or so of my life would have to improve before it could be classified as horrible. There are two explanations for this, or rather, three. First and foremost, I was involved in a motorcycle accident a little more than a year ago. The truck driver evidently did not notice me as he entered the highway and hit me. As a result, numerous vertebrae in my spine shattered, and I became paralyzed from the neck down. I could only blink my eyes and breathe with difficulty. He could swallow liquid or pureed food. I couldn't even chew, speak, or feel anything from my neck down. Going to the toilet was out of the question. All of the doctors in the hospital said that I was fortunate to be alive at all, thanks to an arrangement with the trucking firm. I obtained a $2 million settlement that covered all of my medical expenditures, and I now had a monthly benefit sufficient to support myself and my wife for the rest of our lives. We were doing well financially, thanks to my retirement and my wife Beth's income from her employment. I remained in the hospital for 6 months before being permitted to return home, and that's when things became even worse. "Like this?" the consultant inquired, staring at me intently. "I'm so ashamed that I don't think I'll be able to repeat what happened over the last 6 months," I replied, a tear rolling down my cheek. "Don't worry," she replied. "Everything that is said here will stay private. Remember, I'm here to help you heal." I nodded and had a drink of water before continuing. "Let's start with your marriage," she suggested. "Tell us a bit about him." I told her about my marriage to Beth, how we met at college and married after graduation. I was just 25 years old at the time of the disaster, and we had been married 3 years. I worked as a mechanical engineer, and she was a paralegal at a prominent law firm downtown. We could afford a reasonably sized 4-room apartment. We had planned to make one of the bedrooms into a children's room. The second one served as an office for both of us. But after my injury, the nursery was converted into my room because it was large enough to house all of my medical equipment during the first month or so. Beth did her best to care for me, but it was evident she wasn't prepared for it, especially the bathroom stuff. So she requested for assistance. Don and Kathy Watkins, our neighbors, offered to help in any way they could. At the time, I considered them friends, and because he worked at Beth's firm, I frequently drove her to work. Katie worked as a nurse at the local hospital and paid me visits on occasion to ensure my well-being. She even assisted us in hiring a caretaker to monitor me during the day. After a month, it was clear that Beth was unable to handle this task, even with all the assistance. Dawn then intervened. "Contact the consultant." "Yes," I answered. It all started pleasantly enough, but I quickly understood that he was not unconcerned about my wife. She cried frequently, and he was always there to soothe her. I heard them kissing on our living room couch. Then he brought her into our old bedroom and had sex with her. But didn't it end there? I shake my head. No. Then he came into my room. He mocked me about how good sex was with my wife. I saw the consultant's expression. "Sorry," I replied. "There's no need to apologize. I need to hear everything. And there's nothing I haven't already heard." Where had his wife been all this time? At work? "Yes," I answered. She frequently worked unexpected shifts, and it was not uncommon for her to stay out all night doing the night shift. "I see," responded the consultant. "Continue. When did all of this stop?" "The day Dr. Steiner arrived to see me. I remembered that day as if it were yesterday. Beth brought Dr. Steiner and my lawyer to my room. Dr. Steiner was an old, short, balding man with a German accent. I remembered my visit with him. "Dr. Steiner wants to see you," Beth explained, leading him into my room. Dr. Steiner came over to me and introduced himself. He also presented his aide with a tablet. My lawyer, Alan Harrison, was also present. "Tim, my name is Dr. Franklin Steiner, and I'm here to talk about possible therapies for your issue." He stated he turned to Beth before proceeding. "I will take care of him here, Missy. Kindly wait in another room." She exited the room, but I could see concern on her face. He approached me, pulled up a chair and sat down, peering into my eyes before speaking. "Now, Tim, allow me to explain everything. I operate a high-end research facility on Lake Arrowhead. We have completed several pioneering experiments on 3D bone restoration and nerve injury implants. I believe your case is a blessing for us. I read your chart and am aware of the damage you have sustained," he continued. "But I believe we can help you recover the most, if not all, of your physical ability. Would you be interested in this?" Please blink once if you agree and twice if you disagree. What else can I say about that? Of course. I blinked once. Okay, he replied with a smile. You must understand that all of this is experimental. However, we have been given permission to test on humans. And because to the external donations we got, it will not cost you anything. This was positive news, but I was a little concerned that it was an experiment. I understand your fear about this being an experiment. He spoke as if he were reading my thoughts. Do not let it disturb you. If the operation fails, you will not be worse off than you are now. But I believe you are a good candidate, and I am confident that everything will go well. In fact, if we succeed, which I believe we will, you will be stronger than you were before the catastrophe. This gave me hope, so I listened as he described the technique. He basically explained that all of the injured vertebrae would be replaced with vertebrae composed of a composite material that was stronger than the originals. In addition, the new vertebrae will be 3D printed, utilizing data obtained from my own body. In theory, the new bones should have been identical to the old ones, but stronger. He will also place small electrical implants to help mend damaged nerves. The procedure will last 3 to 4 hours, and recovery may take several days depending on how rapidly I progress. Dr. Steiner also stated that he had already checked my medical records and started the process of building new bones. I hope you don't mind, he added. But initially we wanted to explore if we could reconstruct the broken bone using the data from your records. As soon as we realized we could, we decided to go ahead with the actual process. He also stated that once I am strong enough, I would begin physical therapy. He indicated it might last several weeks. So, do you want to try? He asked. Blink once for yes, twice for no. Of course. I blinked once. He smiled as he stroked his hands. Their gut. He exclaimed, and he motions for his aide to join us. Please allow Mr. Robinson to read the contract. The assistant came over to hold the clipboard while I read the agreement. When I finished, Dr. Steiner asked if I agreed again, ordering me to blink once to confirm. I blinked. He remarked, "Very good," and instructed his aide to sign the electronic signature with my fingerprint. Alan then signed his name, confirming that I had given my approval for the treatment. "Are you prepared to start?" he asked. "Yes, of course." I blinked. He smiled. "So let's go. Do not worry. We've got everything you need." He motioned for his assistants to take me out of the apartment and into a large van waiting in the parking area. Beth stopped us on the way out. "Where are you going?" she asked. Dr. Steiner gazed at her before responding. "Your husband agreed to a surgery that could help him get back on his feet," he said. "Where are you bringing him? How long will he be away? How much is it? We are taking him to me." "To Lake Arrowhead," the doctor said. "He could be out for several weeks depending on how well he reacts to the procedure and rehabilitation. His doctor and lawyer are well aware of what's happening, and he and your husband have given their approval for everything. Cost is not an issue. Now, if you do not mind, we should leave." "Wait," she said. "I haven't seen any agreement, and I don't know what will happen. He does not require your approval, Mrs. Robinson. Alan claimed he is disabled, not incompetent. Everything was explained to him, and he agreed. You want your husband to feel better, right?" "Yes, of course," she replied. I saw a tinge of shame in her voice. "Can I pay him a visit? Perhaps after the treatment, when he is ready to receive guests, you could come. Dr. Steiner suggested it's probably better if you stay here. We will be in touch. Perhaps it's time to say goodbye and wish your husband well." Beth walked up to me and kissed my lips. "Get well, honey," she murmured. "Please let me know when I can visit you." Of course. I couldn't say anything because everything was boiling inside me. After I was seated, Dr. Steiner and his aide wheeled me out to the van. We drove off with the helper in the driver's seat. I noticed Beth standing in the parking lot watching us drive away. I had no idea what she was thinking, but I felt liberated from being kept hostage. We arrived at the hospital a few hours later, and I was led to a beautiful room where numerous nurses began prepping me for surgery. Dr. Steiner remarked, "I hope you don't mind, Tim, but I thought it would be best to start now." He turned to face the nurses. "As soon as you're ready, please take him to the surgery room." "Yes, Dr. Steiner," one of the nurses responded. "Okay, Tim. I'll leave you in your nurse's expert hands, and I'll see you in the OR." He told me before departing, Soon I was undressed, bathed, and dressed in robes. You know, the one that exposes the back. I was placed on a stretcher and wheeled into the operating room, where 3 extremely large orderlies carefully lifted me and placed me face down on the table. The anesthesiologist performed his duties, and the last thing I heard before passing out was Dr. Steiner's voice. I had no notion what he meant. I awoke, still face down, but this time I was wearing a contraption that held me still. They put a tube down my mouth and an IV into my arm. I wore a blood pressure cuff on my right arm. Suddenly, the device pivoted, and I saw Dr. Steiner's face. "Are you awake?" he said. "Fine. You'll be relieved to hear that the surgery went well. We will have to keep you immobile for a few days to ensure appropriate healing. We ended up having to replace a lot. You may notice tingling or itching in your back. This is fine. It indicates that the implants are performing their job. Both the nurses and I will be keeping a careful eye on you. The apparatus you're in will repeatedly flip your body over, so do not be alarmed. Just try to relax for now. Okay, we'll talk in a few days." With that, he checked my vitals. I gave some instructions to the nurses and then left. What exactly did he say? Relax. I wonder what else I can do. He was correct about one thing. I did experience a tingling sensation in the center of my back, which bothered me to no end. I was also itchy and wanted to scratch, but couldn't. Despite how unpleasant it was good to feel something for the first time in a year. That evening, 2 nurses arrived to clean me up. I felt them wash over my legs, buttocks, and back. I was more than surprised. But what is there? They were shocked by what they were doing. They rolled over the bed and began washing me from the front. That's when I caught a good look at them. They were both very young and gorgeous. One had shoulder-length blonde hair while the other was brunette. I sensed something more while getting washed. I hadn't felt this in a long time. I couldn't move my head, but I noticed a smirk on their faces as they cleaned me. The blonde gazed at me. "Well, I'm not a doctor, but it appears that something is working here," she added, smiling. They giggled a little but continued to work. After finishing their business, they exited the room, but not without encouraging me. In the end, I was on the device for 4 days. Every day was very much the same. They took an X-ray in the morning, and the nurses massaged my arms and legs afterwards. Later that day, I received a thorough sponge bath. I discovered that as time passed, I became more aware of what was happening to me. On the 4th day, Dr. Steiner entered the room and carefully examined me, sitting next to me. He pulled out a pin and rapidly inserted it into my leg. I felt a prick and made a noise. I couldn't say anything because the tube was still in my throat. He stared at me. "Have you felt it?" he asked. I blinked and attempted to nod, but my head was still locked in place. He smiled and replied, "Very good." He asked me to try wriggling my toes, and to my astonishment, I could do it. He then instructed me to move my fingers, which I did with fabulous. He exclaimed. He thoroughly studied my X-rays and summoned many nurses. "I think it's time to get Mr. Robinson out of this situation." They took the tube out of my throat, removed the catheter, detached all of the tubes, and unclipped me from the device. I was then brought to my room on a gurney and lay down on the bed. The doctor spoke with the nurses before sitting down next to me. "I cannot describe how satisfied I am with your outcomes. Right now, we will need to begin your physical therapy, which will begin with simple exercises you can do in your bed. I do not want to put too much tension on your back just yet." He handed a cup with a straw to my lips. "Drink," he said. I did it, and it felt great. "Try saying something," he suggested as I swallowed. "Wow," I wheezed. He laughs and nods. "Enough. How do you feel? Like a new person?" I said, still in a shaky voice. I felt my eyes start to water. This was the first time I'd been able to do or say anything since my accident. He pulled out a napkin to wipe my eyes. "I understand that this is an extremely emotional occasion for you, Tim. In the meantime, please calm down. Do not try to overdo it. Your back still needs to heal a little. However, the implants appear to be working properly. I'm afraid that you may have lost muscle mass following your injury, so we'll put you on a diet and exercise regimen to help your muscles function again. And now, I'd like to introduce you to the personnel who will be looking after you." He waved his hand, and several young women entered the room. "This is Angela. You're a dietitian," he explained. Ingrid will be your physical therapist, he said, pointing to the short, strong blonde who nodded curtly. Linda will be your day nurse, he announced, pointing to a diminutive woman with short, dark hair. And this is Kirsten, your night nurse, he added, pointing at the tall, red-haired woman. Her eyes twinkled when she smiled at me. Nice to meet you. I succeeded. Dr. Steiner remarked, Now, if you need anything, please let us know. We all reside on site and are available 24 hours a day. There was a contraption attached to the head of my enormous bed that let me pull weights while lying down. However, Dr. Steiner did not want me to use it yet. For the first week, they only made me do arm exercises, and then they brought in a machine for leg workouts. Ingrid turned out to be a professional psychotherapist delivering talks. Eins, zwei, drei, vier. She responded in German as I pressed her, now with one foot, then with the other. I couldn't help but notice her accent was much stronger than Dr. Steiner's. She'd make a good drill instructor. I thought as she encouraged me to move quicker gut, we will feed you protein and restore your muscles to normal. With a happy grin, she added that soon everyone in the city will be after you, Fraulein, as well as one or two offended Hausfrau, and this leads us to the present. I responded, glancing at the expert who was patiently hearing my story. She lowered her pen and looked at me. Tim, she warned, the coming weeks will be extremely difficult for you. To be honest, I'm not sure which will be more difficult, physical or emotional healing. I'm delighted you feel comfortable talking to me about this, and I hope you take action against people who abused and ignored you. They broke the law and must face punishment. I want you to know I'm here for you. You are welcome to contact me at any time. Okay, thank you. The session ended here, and I was taken back to my room. A few days later, Dr. Steiner entered my room, escorted by two men in dark coats. I noticed Alan was with them after shooing the nurses out of the room. The doctor sat down beside me. Tim, these folks are here to talk about what happened at your house. I took the liberty of calling your lawyer. I hope you do not mind. Not at all, I responded. Alan appeared surprised to hear my voice. You look much better, Tim. He spoke while standing above me. I smiled as I extended my hand to him. Surprised? He shakes it. Thank you. I said, I feel a lot better now. I can even eat for myself. He is doing fine, according to Dr. Steiner. If things continue as they are, he will grow stronger than he was before the accident. That's good news, Alan said. Tim, this is Agent Smith and Agent Jones of the State Police. Dr. Steiner stated that they are here to obtain a statement from you. Are you ready to talk with them? Of course, I replied. The three guys took up chairs, and Agent Smith took out a tape recorder. Mr. Robinson, I hope you don't mind if we record this interview. Not at all. They spent the following hour taking notes and asking questions. I recalled the previous 4 months of maltreatment at the hands of Don Eakins, a man I considered a friend. This was the third time I had to admit what had happened to me, and it was just as embarrassing and agonizing as the previous 2 times. Tell me, Mr. Robinson, Agent Smith asked. Looking back, is this the same Donna Keynes who works at McMaster and Williams law firm? Yes, him. Does your wife also work at this company? Yes. And you allege they were having an affair at the time? Absolutely correct. Has she ever been there during a violent incident? Asked Agent Smith. I shake my head. She was in the apartment, but not in the same room as us, as far as I recall. In fact, she seemed to believe he was assisting me in some way. I see, answered the agent. Even if she wasn't physically in the same room, we'll have to include her as an accomplice. It's hard to imagine she wasn't aware of what was going on. Tim, are you certain about all this? Asked Alan. Shocked. I know Don Atkins personally, and I find it difficult to think he is capable of such a thing. You have Dr. Steiner's report. He said, I can't explain it. I understand that you intend to divorce your wife. Definitely. He nodded his head. Fine. I will handle the paperwork and contact you before we submit. I also need a restraining order. I told him I didn't want them around me, and particularly not in my flat. Agent Smith stated that starting now, we will treat your residence as a potential crime scene. How long will Mr. Robinson be here? He asked Dr. Steiner. Difficult to say. At least another 5 weeks, possibly longer. This is contingent on how well he reacts to treatment and therapy. Very good, replied Smith. At least he'll be protected for a while. He turned to his colleague and requested a search warrant for Robinson's flat, as well as arrest warrants for Mrs. Robinson and Mr. Akins. The second agent nodded and exited the room. Smith turned to face me again. "For your knowledge, Mr. Robinson, we intend to charge your wife as an accessory. Would you be willing to testify against her in court?" "Damn. Okay," he replied quietly. Jones had already returned and given him a thumbs up. "The warrants will be available when we return to the office." Smith nodded as he packed up his tools and the sample he had gotten from Dr. Steiner. "We will get back to you, Mr. Robinson," he stated. "I hope things work out for you." "Thank you." After they went, Alan approached me. "Tim," he stated, "you are making serious accusations. Don may lose everything, his work, his license, and possibly even his marriage. Are you sure about this?" "I am very certain, Alan. I honestly told him that I didn't care if he lost everything. In fact, given what he did to me, he deserves to lose everything." "I hope you're on my side. Tell me now. If not, I will find another lawyer." "I am on your side, Tim," he said. I do not know. It is difficult for me to believe it. I met him and his wife at their home, and there was nothing to suggest he would do something so idiotic." "Well, he did it anyhow," I explained. "May I sue him?" Alan answered, "I see no reason why not. We live in one of the few states that permit the alienation of affection litigation, so I will do that. But you must recognize that they rarely go very far. I genuinely apologize for this, Tim. I had no idea. It is not your fault." I said. I did not tell anyone about it. We said farewell, and he departed. I felt slightly better knowing that something will be done. The next 2 weeks passed fast. Ingrid immediately brought me to my feet. She made me walk on the treadmill first, followed by dumbbell exercises. Angela put me on a high-protein, high-fiber diet, and my muscle mass began to restore to normal. Meanwhile, officials began investigating Dawn and Beth. Alan believed it was best to hang on to the divorce papers until she was arrested again. Smith and Jones returned several times with assistant state's attorneys, requesting additional information from me. Alan also hired a private investigator to find evidence of their adultery. This was not tough because they were both quite upfront about their relationship. Apparently, Don's wife, Kathy, was unaware of their activities because she worked at night while they were having fun and slept during the day when they were working. After gathering the proof and completing the papers, Alan arrived to discuss everything with me. He intended to file a case on grounds of adultery, neglect, and cruelty. He had numerous images, films, and audio to back up his claim. I didn't want to hear or see what they were doing, especially since I'd seen and heard enough for a lifetime. He also had documentation against Don and wanted to sell the company where they worked. Since Beth was legally his subordinate, he had blatantly violated corporate policy. He also intended to denounce Don to the state bar and file complaints accusing him of various ethical infractions. I couldn't help but notice that Beth never called the clinic to check on my progress or visited to see how I was doing. Apparently, he and Don were too preoccupied with sex to notice me. Well, I figured this would pass. Finally, at the end of the 2-week period, officials arrived and arrested them right there at the workplace. Alan's court courier was also present, delivering paperwork to all interested parties. My lawyer even warned the media, which had watched 2 adulterers being placed in the back of a police car and was stunned by the allegations and proof we had against Don. The firm acted immediately and successfully bargained with Alan to obtain the majority of our requests. They also fired both and reported Don to the state bar. Kathy learned of the arrest the same day Don called her from the county prison, telling her he was in jail and needed her to attend in court at his arraignment to post bail. Agents Smith and Jones spoke with Dr. Steiner before transporting me to the courthouse for my arraignment. Katie saw me as I was being driven to the hearing and ran over. "How is he?" she asked Dr. Steiner. I gazed up at her more. I replied, watching her response. "It has been a year since she last heard my voice. Didn't you hear? I told you that your husband has done a number of awful things during the last 4 months. Meanwhile, he was having fun with Beth. Didn't you know?" "My God," she said. "I did not know, Tim. Please believe me. I had no idea what was happening. I filed for divorce from Beth and am suing Don for alienation of affection. I said if you want, I'll give you my lawyer's contact information in case you decide to file for divorce." "Damn, yeah," she replied. We entered the courthouse and saw the sheriffs bring in Dawn and Beth, both dressed in orange jumpsuits, their wrists and legs shackled and fastened with another chain around their waists. They both looked awful. The state prosecutor requested that both be kept without bail, claiming Don may be a fugitive and Beth be subject to a restraining order. He also informed the judge that I was in therapy and had filed for divorce. The prosecution expressed anxiety that Don would try to exact violent revenge on me. The court read the paperwork and agreed, ordering them both imprisoned without bail pending a hearing. He is planned for next week. Dawn and Beth were being led out, and she noticed me seated in the back of the room. Her eyes widened as I lifted my hand, middle finger extended, as Agent Smith and Jones wheeled me out of the courtroom. Katie caught up with me. She stopped them and knelt down to speak with me. "Tim, I am very sorry about everything," she said. "I honestly didn't know anything." "It's fine, Katie," I told her. "How long will you be gone?" she asked. I shrugged. "I don't know, perhaps a couple more weeks. They truly did a great job with me. Now I can walk a little." "This is great," she exclaimed. "Please remain in touch and let me know how you're doing." "Absolutely." "Katie, I suggested we actually go." "Miss," Agent Smith said. Katie nodded and got up. I understood what she said and added, "Take care of yourself, Tim." "Thank you, Katie," I replied. When we arrived back at the hospital, Agent Smith wheeled me out to the vehicle. I was quickly transported to the physical therapy room where Ingrid was waiting. It is time to begin. She taught me how to walk and even provided additional workouts to help me catch up. I was sore all over by the end of her session with me, but I felt great. After supper, Kirsten stayed behind to double-check my calculations and do some paperwork. When she was finished, she strolled over to the bed, checked that I was comfortable, sat down, and looked at me for a few moments. Something appeared to be bothering her. "Everything's fine," I asked. "You appear to be carrying a heavy burden." "I am simply wondering," she said. "What do you find attractive about me?" "Undoubtedly. I think you're a beautiful girl and an excellent nurse." "And what?" "It's simple." She said, "Well, in all of your time here, you've never hit on me. I was wondering if I did something to upset you or if you just don't find me attractive." I smiled before responding. "Actually, I really like you. However, I am still married. And secondly, I'm just learning to behave normally again. Damn it, I couldn't talk for a whole year. Besides, what about your other patients?" "You are my only patient," she said quietly. "Steiner is very picky about who he assigns to the night shift, it's clear. So our doctor. Steiner is not only a medical genius and miracle worker, but also something of a matchmaker." She laughed. "This kind of thing is known to happen," she said. "Well, Kirsten, it just so happens that I'm very partial to shy, beautiful, red-haired girls, and I'm getting divorced, so there you go." She smiled widely and her eyes sparkled. "Is it okay if I kiss you goodnight?" she asked. "Certainly," I replied. She leaned over and kissed me tenderly. After a second, the gentle kiss turned into something more sensual, and soon our tongues were wrestling in each other's mouths. When she broke the kiss, I felt excitement in my groin. "I'm here for you all night," she said. "Every night. If you ever need anything, call me, okay? I know you're not here for sex, but I'd like to just spend time with you." "I'll do it, I promise," I said. She smiled and quietly left the room. I thought about what she said and fell asleep with images of red-haired angels dancing in my head all night. The next few days flew by as Ingrid worked harder and harder with me. I found that I could walk for miles on the treadmill and my muscles become stronger to the point that I could bench press more weight than ever before. Daily x-rays showed that my new vertebrae were working even better than Dr. Steiner had predicted, and the implants had repaired almost all of the damaged nerves. Kirsten kept me company almost every evening, lying on the bed, watching TV with me, or just talking. We would often share a bowl of popcorn while watching a movie and snuggle together with the bowl on our laps. The evening always ended with 2 hot kisses or 3. I started to feel like a high school student on a date with the most beautiful girl in school. On top of that, I fell in love with her hard. By the time Agent Smith and Jones came to pick me up for the bulk of Beth and Dawn's trial, I no longer needed a wheelchair. But Dr. Steiner insisted that I use it anyway just to ensure that I wouldn't accidentally hurt myself. And he also came with me not only as a witness to my injuries, but also to make sure that I would return safe and sound. I sat down in the chair immediately behind the prosecutor with Dr. Steiner next to me. I saw Beth and Dawn come into the room and sit down next to their lawyer. They looked at me before whispering something to their lawyer. Behind them sat Katie, but she didn't look very happy. The jury selected the day before, were seated, and soon the judge entered and the bailiff ordered everyone to stand, leaning on the railing in front of me. I stood up and noticed the look of shock on Dawn and Beth's faces. When the judge came in, he ordered everyone to sit down and we sat down. Dr. Steiner quietly asked me if I was okay, and I nodded yes. The judge opened the hearing by reading a long list of charges and noting that both Dawn and Beth had pleaded not guilty. After both sides made their opening statements, the judge turned to the prosecutor, who called me as his first witness. Dr. Steiner walked alongside to make sure I didn't fall along the way, and then returned to his seat after I sat in the witness chair. Dawn and Beth looked at each other in shock. They were even more shocked when I spoke after the bailiff made me swear to tell the truth. The prosecutor stood up and approached me. He began by congratulating me on my success, and then asked questions concerning my accident and the year I had been paralyzed. I understood what he was doing by asking these questions. He was informing the jury about my physical condition before treatment at Dr. Steiner's clinic. Most of the questions were about my life at home, how Beth tried and failed to care for me, and how Kathy was able to find home health care providers to care for me during the day, during all this time. "Has your wife ever tried to take care of your emotional needs?" asked the prosecutor. "No, sir," I replied. "Has she ever tried to give you sexual pleasure?" "No. And if she tried, would she succeed?" he asked. I shake my head. "No. I said I didn't feel anything from my neck down. It's clear." "Has she ever hugged you, kissed you, spent time with you, read a book, or watched TV?" I thought hard before answering, but I honestly couldn't remember her doing anything like that. Of course, she kissed me on the cheek from time to time, but that was all. She would peck me on the cheek sometimes, but that was all. "Did she take part in caring for you? Did she feed you, help you bathe, maybe help you in the bathroom?" I tried at first, but I just couldn't. "When did Mr. Atkins appear?" "Almost from the very beginning." "Were you friends before the accident?" "Yes, they were. They lived next door to us. And before my accident, we spent time together." "I see," said the prosecutor. "So you weren't surprised to see him in your apartment?" "No. Like I said, I thought we were friends. They often came and we sometimes had beer or dinner. You say that he and your wife had sex in your apartment. When did it start?" "I don't know exactly," I answered. "They could have done it while I was in the hospital, but I'm not sure. I have no evidence of this. He often let her cry on his shoulder when they were both there. I first heard them probably about a month after I got home from the hospital. Did you hear?" "Yes, I heard them kissing and moaning as they made love. I heard Beth." Beth wiped her eyes as I recalled what I had heard. "Then I heard them having sex in our bed." "What happened?" "After he came into my room and made fun of me while she was taking a shower, he said I would never be that close to my wife again. One day he brought a monitor and a box and said it was so I could watch my wife get a real man. This caused Beth and the jury to gasp. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said as the bailiff wheeled a cart containing a large monitor and a black box into the courtroom. "This is the monitor and box that Mr. Robinson is talking about. The box is actually a digital video recorder. The system also included 2 video cameras, one in Mr. Robinson's bedroom and the other in the room where he was lying. We copied several hours of video recorded by the device." The prosecutor turned to me again. "Was it you who testified that Mr. Atkins used all this so you could watch him have sex with your wife?" he asked. "Yes," I answered quietly. Beth looked at Dawn in shock. "You're a bastard," she said. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order in court," he said. Beth fell silent and the prosecutor continued. "Did you know that Mr. Atkins installed a camera not only in the bedroom but also in your room?" he asked me. I shake my head. "This was news to me. No, sir, I didn't know." "How did your wife react to this monitor? She thought it was wonderful that he bought it for me." "Apparently, she decided that this was so that I could watch sports on TV. And around the same time, the bullying began." "You?" "Yes. That's how it was." "Was your wife present at this time?" "As far as I know, no," I replied. "He always did it around the time, took a shower. Then she would come to my room and tell me how wonderful it was that we had a friend like Don to help take care of me." "How often did this happen?" 2 or 3 times a week." "And how long?" "About 4 months." I heard the jury gasp and saw some of them stare at Beth and Dawn with hatred. Beth looked at the table and Dawn sat stoically, looking straight ahead. So, by your estimate, this happened about 35 times. Asked the prosecutor about this. Yes. Did you know that Mr. Atkins recorded the time spent in your room? He asked me. I shake my head. No, I didn't know. The prosecutor looked at the jury. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Atkins recorded himself with Mr. Robbins in 36 times on this device, he said. He paused as the jury processed his words. With friends like these, who needs enemies? The prosecutor asked rhetorically. The defense attorney objected, and the judge upheld the objection. That's all I have for this witness at the moment, he said. But I reserve the right to still call Mr. Robinson to testify. Very good, said the judge. Your witness, Mr. Green. He turned to the lawyer. Green remained at his desk and looked at me before speaking. Mr. Robinson, I'm very sorry to hear about your injuries, and I hope you recover. Thank you. Only one thing, he continued. Did you ever make it clear to Mr. Atkins that you did not approve of his alleged actions? I could not. I was completely blacked out and couldn't even speak, so the answer is no. That's because I couldn't, I said, irritated. Also, you didn't tell anyone about what happened, not even your wife. Isn't this true? Now I was angry. That's because I was completely disconnected. And couldn't, I shouted, slamming my fist onto the heavy wooden railing in front of me for a moment. No one said or did anything when I removed my hand. I saw that I had broken the railing. I had no idea I hit it so hard. I looked at the judge before speaking. Excuse me, Your Honor, I said I lost my temper. Don't do it again, he warned me. I nodded my head. That's all I have for this witness. Green said the judge indicated that I could leave the stand, and Dr. Steiner escorted me to my seat. The prosecutor then called Dr. Steiner to the witness stand. He told the court about my injuries and the extent of my disability. He also talked about the operation and my successes. After it, he turned to the judge. That's all I have for this witness, Your Honor. Your witness, Mr. Green, said the judge. Thank you, he said. Dr. Steiner, you run the Arrowhead Institute for Advanced Medical Research, right? Yes, that's true, he said. You're doing some pretty cutting-edge research. There aren't you? Green asked. Yes, said Dr. Stein, switching to his native German as he sometimes did. Green pulled out a piece of paper and began to read. Each of us has various defense mechanisms that help us cope with extreme situations. Sometimes we revert to an alternate version of ourselves, what you could call an alter ego, if you will. This alter ego could manifest itself in different ways. For example, a normally calm, modest person may suddenly become loud, arrogant, and bossy. Those who are not familiar with this person's behavior will suddenly form a completely opinion about him. He read before looking back at Dr. Steiner. You also write about the so-called inner beast that lies dormant in each of us. According to your notes, you claim to have found a way to release this so-called beast to help you deal with a specific situation. This is true. He asked it. I wrote it. And yes, my research showed that it was true, said Dr. Steiner. Isn't it true that some time ago you worked with Mr. Bill Dalton and helped him find his supposed inner beast? Yes, I worked with Mr. Dalton, said Dr. Steiner. However, the exact nature of my work is a matter of medical confidentiality. Isn't it true that towards the end of his treatment, Mr. Dalton's house mysteriously exploded? Green asked the prosecutor, immediately objected. Irrelevant. Your Honor, he said. Your Honor. Green said, we all witnessed Mr. Robinson's reaction. If you may, I think there's a connection here. I will allow it for now, Mr. Green, the judge said. But I would be very grateful if you would express your point of view and move on. Okay, Your Honor, thank you. Green said he turned back to Dr. Steiner. Do you know what happened to Mr. Dalton's house? Green asked. I remember seeing something about it on the news. I also remember the police saying that Mrs. Dalton and partner were producing some illegal substances using very volatile substances. I don't see any connection with this case. According to police reports, Mrs. Dalton ran out of the house screaming about the monster. Obviously, this is the result of exposure to substances that she and her lover produced, said Dr. Steiner. Your Honor, this is completely irrelevant to the case before the court today, and Mr. Green knows it very well. I insist that this line of questioning be stopped, the prosecutor said. I'm inclined to agree, said the judge. I was more than fair. Mr. Green, please move on. Very good, Your Honor, Green said. I have no more questions for this witness. The judge released Dr. Steiner, and the case continued. I have the last piece of evidence, Your Honor. the prosecutor said. With your permission, I would like to play some of the video recordings made in relation to Mr. Robinson. Very good, said the judge. The prosecutor looked at the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm about to show you is very realistic and shocking. He said, it gives me no joy, but I think it necessary for you to see for yourself what Mr. Robinson had to endure for many months. He turned on the monitor and started playing the video. Green stood up and called Beth to the stand. Mrs. Robinson, he said, is it true that you had a sexual affair with Mr. Akins? Yes, that's true, she said quietly. Can you tell me why? He asked. My husband Tim was so badly injured and I felt lost and hopeless, she said. He was there when I needed to cry. Yes, we had sex, but that's all. Just sex, nothing more. Did you know that Mr. Akins was also with your husband? Green asked. No, I didn't know, she said. If they had known, would they have done anything to stop him? Green asked. Yes, I would, she said. Thank you, Mrs. Robinson. That's all for now. Your witness, Mr. Johnson, he said, sitting down. The prosecutor stood up and walked over to the monitor. He walked over to the image on the video that clearly showed my face and looked at Beth. Mrs. Robinson, he began, you testified that you had no idea that your husband was being abused. Is that right? Yes. Look at his face in this video. The prosecutor said the pain and humiliation was obvious to anyone who watched the video. Do you really think that the court will believe that you could look at your husband in such a state and not understand that something was wrong? It didn't occur to me at the time, she said. Before Mrs. Akins brought the paramedics into the house, did you ever feed or wash your husband? Asked the prosecutor. I tried, but I didn't do very well. What happened then? Have you even tried to help? No, she answered quietly. Why? I don't know. I thought Don was helping him and I didn't really know what to do. The truth is that you basically abandoned him, didn't you? The prosecutor asked, prompting to object. I'm withdrawing the question, Johnson said quickly. You said your affair with Mr. Akins was purely sexual, right? Exactly, she replied. And you stated in your testimony that you still loved your husband, right? Yes. Returning to his desk, Johnson pulled out a tape recorder and a folder from his briefcase. He returned to the bench. Your Honor, this is a written report from Samuel Jenkins, a private investigator hired by Mr. Robinson's lawyer, he said, handing the report to the judge. A copy of this report and the audio recording were provided to Mr. Green, as shown in the attached affidavit. The report refers to an audio recording of a conversation between the defendants made during a dinner shortly after Mr. Robinson was hired at Arrowhead. With your permission, I would like to play this recording for the jury. Very good, said the judge. Johnson pressed a button on the tape recorder, and Beth and Dorn were heard talking in the courtroom. So have you given any thought to what we discussed? Said Don's voice. Yes, and I'll admit I'm intrigued, Beth said. Well, what do you think? I have to admit, these last few months with you have been amazing. Much better than my life with Tim ever was. Are you sure that we will succeed? Certainly. I advocate. You know, I can make the judge do whatever I want. Getting Tim declared a ward of the state would be a piece of cake. He can't take care of himself, and it's obvious that you're not trained to take care of him. Honestly, I can't come to terms with this thought. I mean, feeding him like a baby, wiping up his drool, changing his diapers. It makes me sick just thinking about it. I need a man, a full-fledged man, a real man like you. We both know that this Steiner guy can't do anything for him. All the doctors say he will remain disabled for the rest of his life. Once we declare him incompetent, we can take his huge settlement and live like kings somewhere in Costa Rica. Isn't this better than staying here and wiping the crap off little Timmy's ass? Yes, better. However, what about Katie, about this bitch? Listen, there hasn't been anything between us for a long time. She wants kids, but I don't. And frankly, I'm tired of her constant nagging. I just want to make sure you don't show any weakness and say you still love Tim after we work this out. This won't happen. I love you, and only you. The prosecutor stopped the recording and looked at Beth. I felt like my heart had just been ripped out again. So you and your lover planned to have your husband declared incompetent so that the two of you could take his settlement money and run away to Costa Rica, Johnson said. So when did you tell the truth to your lover or here in court? What's the matter, Mrs. Robinson? Please tell me right now so that I know whether to charge you with perjury or not. Tears streamed down her face as she was forced to publicly admit her duplicity. I do not know. I still love Tim, but I still love Don too. She looked at me. Please, Tim, forgive me. I shook my head and turned away. Johnson looked at her with disgust. I've had enough of this witness, he said, leaving the judge let her go, and Green called Don to the stand. So Mr. Akins Green began after Don was sworn in. We saw the video of you and Mr. Robinson. There is no denying what we have all seen. I just have one question. Has Mr. Robinson ever made it clear to you that he doesn't agree with your actions? Not once, Don said with a mocking face. Thank you, Green said, turning away. Your witness? He said to Johnson, who was already on his feet. Mr. Akins Johnson began. You graduated from Harvard Law College, right? Yes, Don said proudly. And you graduated from college at the top of your class, right? Johnson asked. Yes, Don answered. In fact, you are considered the best lawyer in your firm, Johnson said. Green objected. Not relevant, Your Honor. Your Honor, I intend to prove that Mr. Akins not only knew the law, but also understood that Mr. Robinson could not refuse consent. Johnson said, Go ahead, Mr. Johnson, the judge said. Thank you. Johnson said he turned back to Don. You knew that Mr. Robinson was disabled, didn't you? Don sighed, but didn't say anything. Isn't it? Johnson roared. Yes, I knew, Don said. And you knew that the law in this state says that people with Mr. Robinson's disabilities cannot give consent, right? Johnson asked. Yeah, I guess, Don said. Johnson looked at him with disgust for a few moments, then shook his head. I'm done with this witness, Johnson said as he walked away. Are there any other witnesses? Mr. Green asked the judge. Green shook his head. No, Your Honor, he said. I finished. Very good, said the judge. We'll take 15 minutes and reconvene to hear closing arguments. He slammed his gavel and everyone left the courtroom. Dr. Steiner handed me a cup of water. How are you holding up? He asked while I drank. I'll be fine, I told him. He patted me on the shoulder. Fine. Johnson turned around to see how I was doing. I'm sorry you had to go through all this again, but I think we impressed the jury. Wait and see. It's almost over, Tim. Hang in there. Thank you, I said. Soon enough, the break ended and everyone returned to the courtroom. Don Beth and Mr. Green no longer looked as confident as they had during the day. Katie looked so angry she could spit nails. This was the first time she'd heard so much about it. When the judge returned, the bailiff ordered everyone to stand. So, Mr. Green, present your closing statement, he said. Green stood up and faced the jury. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not an easy matter for any of us, and contrary to what you may think, we all hope that Mr. Robinson gets better. Mr. Robinson admitted under oath that he never indicated to my client that he did not consent. Mrs. Robinson had no idea anything was wrong and was unaware that sexual activity had taken place. Therefore, you have no choice but to find my clients innocent. Thank you. He took his seat and the judge motioned for Johnson to make his closing statement. On the way, he turned on the monitor and showed an image of Don raping me. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he said, thank you for your service today. I know it has been very difficult, all of you. The defense tried to confuse the case by arguing that Mr. Robinson did not indicate that he did not agree with what was being done to him. Mr. Robinson was disabled. He could neither speak nor defend himself. By law in this state, disabled people like him cannot give or withhold consent, as did the defendant, Akins, who, by the way, is a well-trained Harvard lawyer. The defense admitted the actions against Mr. Robinson. You've seen the video. You've heard the audio recording. You know that the defendants intended to fraudulently declare Mr. Roberts sole incompetent in order to take what was rightfully his and flee the country. Defendant actions took Mr. Robinson's wife and intended to take all of his money, leaving his own wife penniless. You heard how the defendants plotted against Mr. Robinson. The defense presented no doubt as to what happened. 36 times. Defendant Akins sexually assaulted Mr. Robinson. I insist on the maximum penalty allowed by law. The state did its job. Now I ask you to do your part and give Mr. Robinson the satisfaction he deserves. Thank you. After Johnson took his seat, the judge gave his instructions to the jury and sent them back for deliberations. Dr. Steiner and I walked out into the corridor where Alan was waiting for us. I just wanted to let you know that Beth, the divorce papers, he said she doesn't dispute anything. I just returned it from submitting documents. The judge will sign them in a day or two, and in 6 months you will be a free man. Free, right? I asked sarcastically. Then why don't I feel free? You've been through a lot, young man, said Dr. Steiner. Believe me, everything will work out. I hope so, I said. And I think I know someone who can help you feel better, the doctor said with a knowing smile. You mean Kirsten? I asked. Dr. Steiner smiled and nodded. Yes, he said. She really loves you. You know, it was my turn to smile. I like her too. Very. Okay, said Dr. Steiner. Just be careful. I don't want you to have sex for at least another 6 to 8 weeks. I don't want you to strain your back too much just yet, he added with a smile. By the way, I remembered, what's the matter with these railings? How did I manage to break this thing? These must be the supplements we gave you. He said that in Ingrid's physical therapy, and nothing to do with this inner beast. He laughed. 9, he said. Not at all. This is a completely different project. Besides, I wouldn't recommend it to you. We talked some more, and about an hour later, Johnson poked his head into the hallway. The jury is back, he said. Already? I asked. He nodded. Something quick? I said. Yes, it is, Johnson said. I hope this is good news for us. Returning to the courtroom, we again went through all the formalities. The bailiff told us all to stand as the judge entered, and at his signal, we all took our places. Has the jury made a decision? He asked. Yes, announced the foreman of the jury. The bailiff took the sheet from the foreman and handed it to the judge. After reading to himself, he told Beth and Don to stand up. Green stood next to him regarding the charges brought against the defendant, Don Akins. What have you decided? Asked the judge. We find the defendant, Don Akins, guilty of all charges, the sergeant major said. And regarding the charges brought against the defendant, Beth Robinson, what have you decided? We found defendant Beth Robinson not guilty of the charge of complicity in the sexual assault of a disabled person, Your Honor, and guilty of all other charges, the sergeant major said. The judge nodded his head. Very good, he said, turning to the defendants. He unleashed all his fury on them. Over the years, I have seen and heard a lot in this room, but I have never seen or heard anything as outrageous and courageous as today. You two, frankly, make me sick. You not only laughed at your marriages, but also at the legal profession. That is why I am awarding you the maximum penalty allowed by law. Your Honor, he said. Mrs. Robinson just informed me that she has signed divorce papers and would like to speak with Mr. Robinson before she is taken into custody. Do you agree, Mr. Robinson? Asked the judge. I can give her a couple of minutes, Your Honor. He nodded his head. Very good. He banged his gavel and announced that the trial was. Beth approached me as the sheriff's deputies were about to take Don away. You look good, Tim, she said. Thank you. I said. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry about all of this, she said. I really had no idea what he was doing to you. I would have done everything I could to stop it if I had known. I think you convinced the jury of that. I said. However, I am ready to agree with the judge. I find it hard to believe you are not a stupid woman. In any case, you will have 15 years to think about it. Is there something else? Yes, she said. I wanted you to know that I signed the divorce papers, and I'm not going to fight you about it. I already know, I said. Don't you want to know why everything happened this way? She asked. I shake my head. In fact, I do not care. I'm sure it's all due to greed and lust. You betrayed me, plain and simple. The why doesn't really matter anymore. Don't you think you can ever forgive me? She asked. Why do all you cheaters think that you can crawl and get forgiveness? I asked. You didn't care about me when I needed you the most. But to answer your question, I'll say, no, I'm not going to forgive you. Instead, I will do my best to forget your existence. Is there something else? I know you won't believe me, but I love you, she said. I just wanted to tell you this before I go to jail. You're right, I said. I don't believe you. But anyway, thanks for saying that. I guess you better leave. Those sheriff's deputies don't look too happy. Okay. She said goodbye, Tim. With these words, she left with tears in her eyes. At that moment, I had absolutely no feelings for her. As I stood up, Katie came up to me. How are you, Tim? She asked. You look better than have in a long time. Thank you, I said. I really feel much better, thanks to Dr. Steiner. I just wanted to apologize for what my asshole soon-to-be ex-husband did to you, she said. I appreciate it, I told her. Have you contacted Alan? Yes, I got in touch, she said. Don's father insisted that we enter into a prenuptial agreement before the wedding, and it has a very strict clause about adultery, so Alan wants to spend the whole day with him. Glad to hear that. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. Thank you. I may have to borrow a few copies of these videos from you. No problem, everything you need. I won't be around for a while, but I'm sure Alan will be able to use what he already has. And one last thing, she said, I still have your apartment key that you gave me right after the accident. I'll clean it up and take Beth's things from there if you want. That would be a great help, Katie. I said, thank you. No problem. Good luck, and I'll see you soon, she added, kissing me on the cheek. We watched her leave. I couldn't believe how stupid Don was to cheat on such a good woman. Are you done flirting with all the women? Asked Dr. Steiner. I'd like to get back to work if you don't mind. It suits me. But how will we get back? No problem. We'll take care of it, Agent Smith said, standing behind us. After all, we brought you here at Dr. Steiner's insistence. I got into the wheelchair and he took me to the car where we all sat down. I actually felt some relief sitting in a wheelchair. I spent most of the day walking back and forth and feeling a little tired and groggy. We returned to the hospital and Dr. Steiner took me to my room where Kirsten was waiting. After dinner, she helped me get ready for bed, then went to the bathroom where she changed into pajamas, which were really just a long t-shirt. How do you feel? She asked, climbing into bed with me. Devastated. It was a long day. She kissed me and laid her head on my shoulder. Yes, it's true, she said. I know it was hard, but it had to be done. Now you can start to forget everything, and I will be there to help in any way I can. I looked at her face for a moment before speaking. I love you, Kirsten, I said without any second thought. She smiled sweetly and kissed me on the lips. And I love you, Tim. She put her head on my shoulder and her hand on my chest. I felt happier than I had in a very long time. Soon we both fell asleep. Over the next 5 weeks, I was exhausted. Inner coach Ingrid outdid herself by pushing me to go further and faster with each session. On top of that, I was seeing a counselor twice a week to help me overcome the abuse I had suffered in the past year. Every day I had an X-ray taken to check the condition of my spine. Kirsten spent every night in my bed and we got to know each other well. Finally, Dr. Steiner announced that I had recovered enough to be discharged home. By then, my body was in better shape than ever. But he told me to abstain from sex for another 3 weeks. He also scheduled me to see him twice a month for the next year so I could have a routine back exam. I couldn't wait to get home, but I also knew I would miss Kirsten. On the day I was supposed to leave, I wrote her a note telling her how I felt about her. I also invited her to visit me anytime she wished. I finished the note when Dr. Steiner came into my room with a wheelchair. I looked at him, confused. After all, I was now able to walk on my own. He shrugged. Regulations, I understand. I answered, sitting down in a chair. I hoped I would never sit in one of those things again. He drove me to a pickup truck stop and I looked around, waiting for the Aero van to appear. Instead, I saw a dark blue Toyota RAV4 pull up the driver's side door, open it, and I saw Kirsten, my high red angel of mercy. She walked around the car and opened the passenger door for me. Surprised? I looked at Dr. Steiner. Kirsten has a new assignment. He said she will be your permanent guardian. That is, assuming you have no objections. Absolutely nothing, I answered, smiling and shook his hand. Thank you, Dr. Steiner, for all. You're welcome, he replied with a smile. See you in a couple of weeks. He stared at Kirsten. And please take care of our boy, okay? Definitely, she said, smiling after helping me get inside. She got inside the car. I noticed that several luggage were stuffed into the trunk of the car. So how long are you going to work with me, I asked. It depends on how long you need me. How long do you think this will take? By a conservative estimate, I would say at least 60 years, she replied. Does it suit you pretty damn good? She kissed me on the lips, then walked off and headed home. When we arrived home, I marked the day on my calendar that Dr. Steiner cleared me to have sex. As it turned out, it was the day after the divorce from Beth was formalized. And yep, on the day I indicated on the calendar, we actually had sex. But it was so much more than simply sex. It was pretty darn close to a religious experience, as Alan predicted. My alienation of affection allegation against Don didn't get very far, but that was good. Kathy gutted him during the divorce. Katie stayed in the apartment she had with Don and became acquainted with Kirsten roughly 2 years after the divorce. She fell in love with a doctor and got married. I never visited Beth in prison, but I understood that she was undergoing treatment. 10 years later, she was paroled and obtained a work as a waitress at a truck stop diner on the highway. About 6 months following my divorce, Kirsten and I tied the knot. It was timely since, a few weeks after we returned from Hawaii, she announced that we would soon be parents. After that, we had 2 more, and we decided that was enough for now. Our love for one another remained strong, and when our youngest kid left for college, we celebrated with a globe cruise. Even after all these years, she remains my stunning red-haired angel of mercy. My vertebrae were stronger, and I felt better than before. The implants also did their work, and the nerve damage I sustained in the accident was corrected. Over the next 10 years, Dr. Steiner repeated the operation successfully multiple times, and the procedure is now awaiting final approval. Thank you for spending the time to hear today's story. If you enjoyed the story, please consider liking and subscribing if you have not already. If you have a story to tell me about your own or someone else's situation, please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.